Hey guys, I am here to read you chapter 3 from Andrew Clements, the report card. We have already learned that our main character, Nora, is a little bit different, right? She's very intelligent. She has a really great memory. I'm wondering what else we're going to find out about Nora today. We all know that she has on purpose gotten D's on her report card. She's had it in an envelope and she's afraid it's about to be time for dinner. I'm worried for her about what her parents are going to say. Even though she did it on purpose, I have a feeling they might be a little bit upset. Let's read on and find out what happens to Nora. All right, here we go. Chapter 3, School and Stephen. Soon, Mom was going to call me downstairs for dinner. After dinner would come the reading of the grades. And then, sorry, I've got you on the wrong page there. After dinner would come the reading of the grades, and then, boom, my whole life was flashing in front of me, like a report on the 6 o'clock news. Memories kept flooding in. I couldn't help it, and I realized that this explosion had been building up ever since I first went to school. Another fact from the memory files, I had gotten off to a bad start in kindergarten. That's mostly because I spent my first 2 weeks at Philbrook Elementary School, hiding under a table in Mrs. Bridges' room, pretending I was a cat. I meowed and hissed, and at snack time I poured my milk into a plastic bowl I had brought from home. That was so I could lap up the milk with my tongue. I acted like a cat until 11:53 every day. Then I would get up, dust off my knees, put on my jacket, and get ready to ride the bus to my afternoon daycare. The cat business had started a month before kindergarten began. I had read this great article in National Geographic about leopards, and then I had learned everything else I could about cats. And I had decided that cats were amazing and wonderful, and I thought it would be fun to see what it felt like to be a cat. That's where the idea came from. But the real reason I began being a cat at school was because I knew that if I started doing schoolwork in kindergarten, it would be too easy. Everyone would have thought I was too good at it. Being too good would have made me seem too different. It was so much easier to be different by being a cat. No one would suspect a cat liked to read the Encyclopedia Britannica. No one would guess that a cat had memorized 38 of the poems in A Child's Garden of Verses. No one would suspect that a cat had taught herself to understand Spanish by watching the Univision channel. And no one would suspect that a cat was interested in maps and history, and archaeology and astronomy and space, travel, and the Latin names for animals, like Felis catus, the domestic cat. I was smart, but I didn't have much experience. I was still a 5-year-old kid. So I made a miscalculation. A miscalculation. So to calculate is to come up with a solution to a problem, right? Using generally math. So if you make a miscalculation, it's kind of like making an error. You maybe underestimate something, or you think something's one way and it's really another. That's a miscalculation. So as a 5-year-old kid, Nora made a miscalculation. Because I thought that once everyone at school had gotten used to the idea that I was pretending to be a cat, they'd pretty much leave me alone. But of course, that wasn't the way it worked at school. Right away, Mrs. Bridge called my mom. My mom got upset, and then she told my dad, and he got upset. I've always loved my mom and dad, but they tend to get excited too easily, especially about school stuff. That was why I always kept one part of myself hidden from them, the smart part. So back when I was in kindergarten, my parents didn't even know I could read. And really, it hadn't been that hard for me to keep my small part a secret. My mom was working for a real estate company, and my dad was running his own business. And then there was the housework and the yard work, plus 3 kids to take care of. Fact, my mom and dad have always been busier than sparrows. So sparrows are those little tiny birds that flutter around a bunch. You've probably seen them out in your yard. We have them here in Arkansas. So they dart around between things and they're super busy. I never tried to get attention and I didn't cause any problems. So everyone left me alone most of the time. I was careful never to give my mom and dad anything to worry about. I spent a lot of time looking at books when I was little, and I'm sure they noticed that. But they must have thought I just liked to look at the pictures. And I also spent a lot of time watching TV. But it's not like I was some kind of weirdo zombie tube-head hermit bookworm, because that would have really made them worry. I had friends at daycare and in the neighborhood, and I liked to play soccer and mess around outside. Mom and Dad thought I was an ordinary kid. Then I went to school and turned into kindergarten. So my mom and dad got worried and they called the principal, Mrs. Hackney. And then the special education teacher and the guidance counselor got involved, and everyone at school decided I had a learning disability. So a learning disability is something that makes it different. The way you learn is different. Sometimes it can take a little longer to learn something or a little longer to process something, and that's okay. But when that happens for kids, you want to make sure that you get them that help they need so that they don't fall behind. So they're thinking that maybe Nora has a hard time learning. I could feel how they all started looking at me, and I didn't like that. I didn't want people to think there was something wrong with me. So after 2 weeks, I knew I had to stop being a cat. But I didn't want to start being myself. That seemed dangerous too. I thought about it, and the idea I got was so simple. Don't be a cat, be a copycat. I decided that every day I would be like a different kid in my class. I would become a living average of all the other children in my kindergarten. So an average is kind of the middle point. Just normal, like everybody else is doing. And so she's decided she's just going to do what everyone else does, and she'll come across as being normal or average. I think it's interesting that Nora doesn't want to stand out. She's obviously brilliant, right? But she's scared to be different. So one Wednesday morning, instead of getting down under the table, I picked out one other kid to copy. I started doing whatever Stephen Curtis was doing. Not exactly, but pretty close. And he had no idea I was copying him. When Stephen sat on a rug square and watched Susan help Mrs. Bridge pick out the right day of the week to hang on the date board, I sat and watched too. When Stephen got out a puzzle, so did I. And I took as long to do my puzzle as it took Stephen to do his. When Stephen began playing with blocks, so did I. And I tried to make my building look sort of like Stephen's. When Stephen sat at a table and tried to draw the letter A with a pencil, I sat down nearby and worked on the letter B with a crayon. I could have written any letter perfectly, and hundreds of whole words too, but I made it look like writing a B was as hard for me as writing that A was for Stephen. The morning went by quickly, and I was amazed at how many different things Stephen did. Kindergarten took on a new meaning for me. It became my laboratory. So this is a bit of an experiment for Nora, right? Trying to be like everyone else. The next day I decided to be like Caitlin. She threaded beads and so did I. She played in the dress-up corner and so did I. When Caitlin colored some butterflies, I did too. And I even joined Caitlin and the 3 other girls in a game of tag during outside recess. It was another educational day for me. Mrs. Bridge was thrilled about the sudden change in my behavior, and so was the special education teacher, and, of course, so were my parents. And once I turned into an average kid, the pressure stopped. However, I was just getting started with my research. Helen, Laura, Ron, Kathy, Philip, Jeremy, Karen, James, Kim, Susan, Elliot. I played copycat day after day, always shadowing a different kid. Each day was new and interesting. I felt like I was part of the class, and I liked that feeling. But I also learned that I liked being so smart. Because by kindergarten, I had figured out an important fact about me. I was a genius. The things that most kids found difficult were easy for me. I had seen the other children working hard to learn their letter shapes, working hard to understand the sounds each letter made, working hard just to make their fingers hold a pencil or a pair of scissors. I knew that none of them were thinking the way I was or reading the kinds of things I could read. Megan was the only other kid in my class who could read at all, and just some simple picture books. Day by day, I got a clearer idea of how far ahead I was. That didn't make me think I was better than the other kids, though. The more I got to know them, the more I admired them. I was amazed by all their hard work. I realized that I didn't have to work like they did, and that I never had. School was different for me. Everything was different for me. There were 15 kids in my kindergarten, and each one got a turn being copied. So it was about 2 weeks before I spent another day copying Stephen. And it was wonderful because right away I could tell he had made some progress. Stephen must have been working on his letter shapes because now he could draw A through O perfectly. Except he made his capital G backwards every time. I wished I could help Stephen with that, but I knew I didn't dare. Not if I wanted to keep my secret. So I chose D as my backward letter, and I thought, in a couple weeks, when it's time to copy Stephen again, maybe he'll have that G turned around. But 2 weeks seemed too long to wait. That's why I followed Stephen the very next day, and the next 3 days after that, and then all the next week too. I watched everything Stephen did for 9 days in a row, and I heard everything he said. It was an in-depth study. Stephen wasn't one of the smartest kids in the class. I could see that. But Stephen was such a good worker. If he couldn't do something, he was patient, and he didn't give up. If something was too hard, Stephen didn't get mad at himself. He simply moved on and then went back to it, and sooner or later he figured it out. He liked to sit alone sometimes and look out the window or draw shapes with a pencil or a crayon. He didn't look at the pictures in the picture books. He studied them. Also, when Stephen played a game, he always played fair. And the most important thing to me was that, during all the time I watched him, Stephen never said or did one mean or angry thing, not once, to anyone, even if someone was mean to him first. Then one Monday morning, Stephen was absent. Same thing on Tuesday and Wednesday. I almost called his house Wednesday night to make sure he wasn't dying or something, because the thought of school without Stephen was suddenly the worst thing I could imagine. When he got off his bus on Thursday morning, I wanted to run over and give him a big hug. Of course, I didn't. But that's when I decided that Stephen was going to be my best friend. He was just so nice. Because I thought, who could be a better friend than Stephen? And I also thought, if Stephen was my friend, then I could help him. Because that's what friends do. The best thing that happened during my first year at Philbrook Elementary School was getting to be friends with Stephen Curtis. And the best thing that happened during 3rd grade was when Stephen's family moved to a house down the street from me. And the best thing that's happened all 5 years I've known Stephen is that we've kept getting put into the same classrooms with the same teachers. So I stayed best friends with Stephen. And I kept helping him, carefully. Not show-offy, not smarty-pantsy, just some friendly help once in a while, with little things. I was like an extra teacher. Half the time, Stephen didn't even know he needed help or that I was giving it. It was during 4th grade. That's when Stephen started to change. It was after the big test we all had to take at the beginning of 4th grade, the Connecticut Master retesting. Because Stephen didn't get good scores, and I knew why. I'd watch him making faces and chewing his pencil and looking up at the clock every other minute during the test. It was the pressure that got to him, even after all the hours and hours and hours we'd spent in class getting ready for the test. I mean, he probably wouldn't have done that great even without the pressure, because, like I said, as far as schoolwork went, he was an average student. But all the time, pressure didn't help, that's for sure. So Stephen's scores on the CMT were sort of low. Not terrible, just low. Have you ever taken a test like that where you feel like you got so nervous that maybe you couldn't do your best because you were feeling that anxiety and that pressure to do well? You've taken those kinds of tests. My scores weren't great either. That's because I found all this information about the test on the internet. I figured out how many questions I had to miss on each section so it would look like I was an average student. My parents weren't happy with my scores, but what could they do? In 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grades, I'd always been an average student. And that's all there was to it. And now the big test proved it. So I didn't care about my CMT scores at all, but for some reason, Stephen did. He cared a lot about his scores. And from what he said, I guess his parents made a big deal about his test scores too. I noticed a change in Stephen right away. He got mad at himself if he messed up on assignments or tests. He worried about tests and quizzes, spelling tests too, and he was good at spelling. He even started pretending he was sick sometimes so he could stay home from school. And Stephen had never used to do any of that. The worst part was that he didn't seem as happy. Our fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Rosen, and she was great. She said the test scores didn't mean anything. She called them a snapshot, just a chance to look and see where we needed to improve. She said not to worry if the scores seemed low, because there was plenty of time to improve. I understood her, and all of that was true. But I could tell Stephen didn't believe Mrs. Rosen. He felt like he wasn't good at school anymore. He felt like school was a struggle. And Stephen wasn't the only one. All of the kids started keeping track of test scores and homework grades. School was suddenly about the competition, and grades were how you could tell the winners from the losers. Every assignment and quiz became a contest. I even saw a couple of kids cheating on a spelling test. Then in the middle of fourth grade, 3 kids from our class were chosen to be in the gifted and talented program. The gifted kids went to special classes. They read special books, they had a special teacher, and if they worked hard, they were moved ahead. They could even skip grades. It felt like school had turned into a big race, and it looked like the gifted kids had already won. Which was one more reason that everyone in our class started sorting themselves out into the smart kids and the average kids and the dumb kids. And that was terrible, because Stephen started thinking he was one of the dumb kids. It wasn't true, not at all, not for any of the kids. But that's how Stephen felt. Fourth grade was a miserable year for Stephen, and for me too, because a person can't be happy if their best friend isn't. Stephen was glad when fourth grade ended. It felt like his troubles were over, and summer was going to be great just like always. But I was looking ahead to fifth grade. Stephen didn't know what was coming in fifth grade. He only had one little brother, so Stephen was the first kid in his family to go through the schools in Philbrook, Connecticut. Not me. I knew about fifth grade in Philbrook. I'd watched Anne go through fifth grade, and then Todd. Fifth grade was when Anne had started turning into a grim little A-making machine with plenty of pushing from Mom and Dad. Fifth grade grades were real letter grades, not like just like the junior high and the high school. No more cute pluses and checks and minuses. Fifth grade grades were the real thing, A's and B's and C's and D's and F's. Fifth grade grades would be used to see which kids got into the higher math classes at the junior high. Fifth grade grades would be used to see which kids got into the advanced English classes and the foreign language program and the accelerated science classes. In Philbrook, Connecticut, fifth grade grades mattered. And if Stephen got messed up by the mastery testing and a little competition during fourth grade, then fifth grade was going to feel about 10 times worse. When Stephen hit fifth grade, it was going to be like a train wreck. During this first grading term, I had seen it already starting to happen. It could only get worse. Unless someone thought up a way to help, and that was my job, because that's what a best friend does. If she can, she helps. And that's what I was thinking about when my mom yelled, "Dinner time!" And don't forget, she called upstairs to Ann, Todd, and me, "Please bring your report cards to the table." I cannot wait to see what Nora's parents say. I was hoping we would find out in this chapter, but it looks like she's made us wait. I really like how in this chapter, Andrew Clements, the author, takes us back into Nora's childhood and gives us that background information we need to understand her as a character. I want to show you your questions for today. I've got a few of them here. I'm going to move me. The first one, describe Nora's first 2 weeks of kindergarten. What was Nora trying to hide in kindergarten? Imagine how difficult it must have been for Nora to play copycat in kindergarten. How do you think she felt? Explain. And finally, why did Nora feel that Stephen would make a perfect best friend? I hope you guys are enjoying this book as much as I am. I can't wait to keep reading with you. I will see you next time.